Yes.
So, we hear every day, probably around the morning time, that you guys are very close, you guys are inching towards a deal. Just how close are you guys? What's the distance that you guys need to bridge?
That is a good question, and not one that we can answer. And the reason that we can't answer that is that we are not at the negotiating table. I often say, if we were at the negotiating table, this budget would have been done on time. But that's sort of a flip thing to say, because it's not easy to do. And unless you are at the negotiating table, you don't know how difficult it is. I think I learned that when I was mayor, Lillian. Things look, simple as, just do this or that. And then you get in the weeds on it and you go like, wow, it's really complicated. So, but we are not at the negotiating table. We are ready to go to have, and we have had the conversations with our leadership. We let them know what are our priorities for our districts and for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we have these conversations earlier in the spring when discussions are just beginning. So our wishes and hopes and the things we're fighting for, we put on the table for budget consideration in the spring. And then they are on the table as a part of all of the other conversations. Some of the things that we've put on the table individually may end up in the budget, but we don't know until the end. We've done our job to put them on the table and advocate for them, but then there are, all of the other competing and other important issues that are obviously not easy to resolve. So it's never easy, but how close they are, the governor says they're getting closer. I would believe they are getting closer. Governor Shapiro also said there are still a few sticking points, and they will have to continue talking. It sounds like they are. That's the most important thing, is that people stay at the table and talk. But we don't know how close they are. We hope they're very close. Yes, Lynn.
My question is, when is the Senate scheduled to come back for the next session? And would the three of you be willing to go back earlier than the call back time to vote on a budget?
The Senate is scheduled to go back on September the 8th, 9th, and 10th. And this has been the schedule since it was put out in February or whatever. We're on a 24-hour call of Leader Pittman. So if he said, you need to show up tomorrow at 11:30, we would need to show up, and we would show up tomorrow at 11:30. We have had, and yes, we would all be like, yes, we will go in and we will, force it would only be Democrats, voting on a budget that we think is fair. We have discussed that. It is my understanding, and I share the thoughts on this, that it's not helpful to go in and vote on something for which there is no agreement. It's more important to be talking about what the issues are, supporting those that are doing the negotiating and behind the scenes budget talks. We have talked about it, but it's not from what I understand and what I believe to be the most effective way of moving an idea forward. We don't know. We heard the governor say yesterday they're getting closer. And it is most important for us, in my opinion, to support the negotiators who are at the table and to not distract from or otherwise perhaps detract from the possibility of getting to that compromise. It's hard to sit back But it's important to be respectful and aware of what is really going to work and what could hurt.
Well, the reason I asked is I called Senator Pittman's office to see if he would call back early so you folks could all work something out, and the answer of his office is they hung up on me.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. But they heard you, and I'm sure others are calling and asking as well. And it is important to call any elected official because we all listen and we all keep track of who's calling about different issues. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yeah.